we are becoming inhibited in our capacity to dream other worlds into being. And part of that is like stacked up shadow stuff, loss, frustration. It paralyzes our imaginative faculties. So to me, it started to become really clear that there is this sort of counter work to be done. If you're working in imagination and dreaming the new things into being, we equally need to be getting better at dreaming the old things out of being, composting the old and making space for that stuff to get metabolized, to not get stuck, to not just get pushed down. We have to work out how to tend to these endings in our lives.
Ally Kingston of Purpose Disruptors and Agency for Nature and Tending to Endings. You do so many amazing things. And you have a lurcher. So what could be better as we're moving down towards in our hemisphere, the dark nights and the times of introspection and the time of looking within, the looks within, and the exploration of who we are and how we are and who we could be. Welcome to Accidental Gods. It's been a long time coming and I am so looking forward to this. How are you and where are you?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, I'm thrilled to be here. How am I? I'm well. I'm staving off some nursery lurgies that are coming to our house, but I've got lots of Barocca. I'm in, I'm in a market town in Somerset in my kitchen. And
Yay.
yeah,
You've got lots of, what are you using to stave off the nursery viruses?
Barocca. Do you drink Barocca?
No, I obviously should. No,
Oh,
no.
Barocca is my tonic. Yeah, you can
Okay.
find it in any. I'm not sponsored by them. It's just a very good kind of
Okay.
B-ish thing, I think.
Oh, okay. Industrial doses of vitamin C. We just eat the powder. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, we'll put a link to that in the show notes too.
Please don't. Yeah.
And we just hit the homeopathy and then get it anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
Alrighty. So, amongst all the other things that you're doing, you helped to set up Agency for Nature. I think probably you set it up single-handed. You can tell us that. And on its page, it says, amongst a lot of other amazing stuff, we need to help human civilization come back to life. And that just leapt out and hit me between the eyes because it's so true and it feels increasingly urgent. And so I wanted to ask you two things. How did you get to understanding that? Because I'm guessing you wrote that. And how do we get there? So let's answer the easy one first, which is how did you get to understanding that we need to help human civilization come back to life?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's funny to have someone play back that line because it does feel, it feels like a bold assertion, but I think we all know it's absolutely true. Certainly not me. It's a group effort. The Agency for Nature. It began back in 2023. So an organization I work for, Purpose Disruptors, who we'll probably speak to a little bit more. And a wonderful organization called Glimpse, who are no more, but who are also really deeply engaged in kind of nature connection and creativity and how all those things intersect. We all kind of came together, and I guess our question was like, we have this amazing kind of machine in the form of the creative industries, who are really responsible for shaping what a good life looks like in the public imagination. Like and it's a version of a good life at the moment that we're all surrounded by, which is really one of material abundance, right? Like more stuff, status, power, etc. That's not the one that actually makes us happy. We know that. And it's not the one that is possible within the confines of our planet. And then at the same time, we've been doing a bit of research into what people really are dreaming of when they dream of a good life. And it's always the same thing. If you speak to people in the UK across any party line, it's like they're really dreaming of connectedness, more connectedness, to themselves, to other people, and to the natural world. It is just, it comes through again and again, this real desire and this feeling that something is missing.
Because
So-
something is missing.
because it is missing.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So part of this project, I think, was a response to what we knew was an inherent desire that we wanted to kind of play back to people. And then, of course, there's a bigger context around, we know that we have really severed an incredibly primal connection to life on Earth, and with some of us, we're starting to get inklings of how it might feel to just be, threaded back in, even in a small way, even in modernity. It's like, okay, wow, feels a hell of a lot better than not having that,
Right, right. And so Agency for Nature, there was a group of you, I get that. And you were all within the advertising industry that seems to be right in the heart of the death cult of predatory capitalism. It is the superorganism, or, along with the markets and all of that sort of thing. But it is the thing that drives consumption. And as if we understood it correctly, it was basically started by Sigmund Freud's nephew, who took everything that his uncle had understood about human insecurity and weaponized it in service to increasing consumption. Because until then, people didn't have as much of the sense that stuff was going to solve all their problems. And I'm sure we've been part of the trauma culture for millennia. And there was always a hierarchical, patriarchal system that was pushing value to the top. But it wasn't accelerating it to the top in the way that it is now. And so the industry that arose to sell people the idea that consumption was going to solve all their problems succeeded in weaponizing human psychology very fast. That race to the bottom of the brainstem that we're seeing was absolutely predicated on an understanding of human insecurity. How did you at Agency for Nature decide to switch it, and what was your strategy for switching it? Does that make sense as a question? Is it what you decided to do?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're absolutely. I love the way you just described what role the advertising industry plays. It's absolutely on the nose, and I worked in it for many years. That was where I came from. So most of Purpose Disruptors came from the advertising industry, and then at some stage in all of our careers had a real moment of waking up, I guess, to that feeling of like, oh, okay, the better I do my job, the faster this
we're going over the
slide
cliff.
down. Exactly. Like those two things are directly correlated. Like this is the industry that amplifies the system we're in,
Yeah.
And that's obviously a big thing to grapple with, and a lot of people do when they leave, including myself.
Right. But a lot of people leave and go off and do something completely different. And what you guys have done is go, okay, we can take these skills and use them in service to life.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing, I think in my journey was I left and I worked in sustainability for a while and sort of tried to understand that, and then realized, I have no use here. I'm learning about like nitrate runoff and how to minimize that. But like, I'm a creative strategist. I'm a person who's spent 10 years learning how to distill really complex ideas into something very simple that has cultural relevance or kind of, that can travel around media. So what am I doing over there? Like I need these are really good skills. They're just currently only being used in service of that whole mess, right? So like what would it look like if we started to, I guess, like redirect the creative firepower of the industry, the advertising industry in service of in service of a new version of a good life, really.
Right.
And that's where Agency for Nature really came from, was like, okay, we kind of know it's this, like we know we need to fall back in love with the world, right?
The web of life, everything that is
life, exactly.
human and not human. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long has it been going?
We opened in 2023.
Okay. So just on the back of the pandemic. So a couple of years. We'll be heading into 3 years soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you make your money? Because it's very easy to see how advertising makes money. It's we're going to help you sell your widgets massively better, and therefore you're going to pay us for the privilege of doing that. And it works. And clearly advertisers can get to be extremely rich. How does Agency for Nature survive in a competitive industrial capitalist culture where everybody still needs to pay the bills? And you're saying to people, your widgets are not what we need to be selling. We need to be selling ideas, and probably we need to be selling fewer widgets or bottles of your carbonated sugar water or your industrial produced food-like substances. How do you sell that as an idea to people?
Well, first of all, I'll say, it's called Agency for Nature. I mean, it's a bit of a pop-up experiment. It's
Okay.
classic advertising backgrounds making it sound like it runs, 24/7 and is a whole thing, because really it's an experiment. It's still um, something that we're, evolving all the time in
Okay.
response to, well, the industry and the world. So I'd say it doesn't really run like a normal agency in any way.
Good. That sounds like a good thing to me.
Yeah. I think we have to experiment, don't we? This is
Sure. So explain to us what sort of experiments you're doing, or perhaps it might be easier to go back to Purpose Disruptors, from which Agency for Nature arose, and explain that as the foundation, and then we could come back to Agency for Nature. Is that a better way around?
Yeah, I'll give a potted history of how it came about. Yeah. So Purpose Disruptors is an organization that really exists to try and support the advertising industry to come into harmony with the natural world, which is a wild ambition.
Which in itself is pretty big. Yes.
It's what? Yeah. And there are loads of different ways that it does that. There's a kind of a measurement arm, which is all about working out how we can start to support agencies to take accountability for like the carbon emissions associated with the uplift in sales they claim to have generated by doing a car campaign, right? Like,
Right.
you
So
take
you sold more of your electric cars, maybe, or even your not electric cars.
your
And
not
as a result,
electric
your
car.
not electric cars, as a
Exactly.
result of that, this much extra carbon in the world.
Yeah.
Wow. And is that embodied carbon as well as emitted carbon by the cars?
Yes. Oh, yeah, exactly. It very
Right.
much embodies carbon.
Wow.
So there's a whole work stream there, which is around how do these kind of service industries like advertising begin to take responsibility and accountability for what they're amplifying in the world, right? Like all of those sales they claim to support, with their campaigns. That's one part of Purpose Disruptors.
Okay, hang on. So let's dig into that, because it seems to me quite quickly, if you take that seriously, selling has to stop. I mean, very quickly. Yeah, we Purpose Disruptors are explaining to you, advertising agency, that you are actually accelerating the bus off the edge of the cliff, and you need to not just be not selling cars, you need to be anti-selling cars. You need to be selling fewer cars. And that involves the total systemic change that we're always heading to, and the frame shift, because at the moment, people still want cars. And cars now is a placeholder for stuff. We still exist in a culture where people believe that having more stuff is the answer to their problems. And up to a point, they need more stuff. The old car died. And I still need to get from A to B because my job is in B and I live in A. And how else am I going to get there? Because there is no functional transport system. And I still live in a world where I still need to pay the bills. And the only way to pay the bills is to have a job that is a long way from my house. And very quickly, things start to unravel, I would imagine, conceptually, to the point where the only answer is total systemic change, and anything else is tweaking, not just painting the deck chairs on the Titanic, but kind of standing looking at the paintbrush.
Exactly.
And how do you get around this, Ally? Because clearly you've thought about this a lot.
Well, I think what you're raising is so interesting, which is like, that's your response to this. It's like, oh, okay, I'm following it to its logical conclusion. Surely the conclusion is, we got to stop selling cars. there's a lot of resistance. People have
People's
a
jobs
lot of
depend on selling
resistance.
cars.
People's jobs depend on them, exactly, their mortgages, their understandings of a good life, and the kind of cushion life they imagine for themselves that a career in advertising facilitates. So, yeah, I would say that is the logical conclusion. And yet we're all working with human people, and
Right.
all of our, our denials and our realistic, like, kind of entanglements with modernity as well.
Right. Because we do still have to pay the bills. And
Yeah.
until we all change the system, one person deciding not to bother paying the bills just makes their entire family destitute. It doesn't change the system. So how do
Yeah.
you go about... let me rephrase this. I'm thinking about this in real time. My assumption is that you are aiming for total systemic change. However, you don't walk into an advertising agency and say that, because it won't mean anything, I guess.
Exactly.
This would be throwing bits of Velcro at the lino. It's not going to stick, because how could it? Because that's not a concept. And yet, I'm thinking that if you lead people gently towards the point we need to get to, there must come an internal crisis that everybody hits, where they realize this current system is not sustainable. And you then turn, I imagine, into the therapists who are holding the space while people fall apart.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're a really big part of Purpose Disruptors is community building and community weaving, because there are so many people who want to come to a pub and say, I don't know what to do with this tension,
Right.
like, I help
Right.
and work it out and game it out and be held in circle and be in an environment which is non-competitive, which is possibly with other people, who are there, like, competition from other agencies outside of the walls of the pub. But here
Right.
it's like, okay, let's all just grapple with this for a second and sit with it for a moment,
Right. Right.
Amazingly, that's where so much change happens, and often without much instruction from, the Purpose Disruptor staff at all.
Right.
It's like you just make a space, step back.
Right. But you're still holding the space, and you still got that sense of being seen and feeling felt and getting gotten that is essential to everybody. Of, I am here with friends, it's a safe space, I can be vulnerable.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
can open, I can let the parts of myself that I have to hide at work come out. And
Yeah.
once they have a chance to speak, then my system can become more integrated. We're
Yes.
talking kind of Thomas Hubel IFS work, but even so,
Absolutely.
that's where we need to get
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've probably accelerated quite fast through what Purpose Disruptors was in the origin, where it's got to now. So tell us a little bit about the history of Purpose Disruptors in more detail, because I'm feeling that we may be leaving listeners behind. I don't want to accelerate from the beginning to the end too fast. Tell us more about how you came to Purpose Disruptors, what it is and what it does.
Yeah. And sorry, I might be slightly talking a little bit circuitously as well, because
No, well, that's me. I'm asking circuitous questions, and I'm
there's-
realizing I'm taking us to where I am, and we need to lead people there. Not
Yeah.
everybody gets there that fast.
Yeah. So Purpose Disruptors began as a group of people working in advertising, or formerly in advertising, who would meet in a pub and who would have this conversation. And that was really it. It was just like, how do we live with this tension? What do we do with it? That was back in maybe sort of 2019. And it morphed into a non-profit organization that slowly, with sort of 3 co-founders, all of whom had held really sort of senior positions across sort of marketing, media, creative, which are sort of different parts of the advertising industry, if you were to sort of map it out. Who created this sort of small organization with a big mission, which was like, how do we really meaningfully engage with the crises around us, and like, what would it take? And even though we're only 3 or now 5, now kind of maybe 8, how can we push an Overton window of what's expected, what's normal in an industry that is, we can all agree part of the problem, right? And what does like systemic change actually look like in action? If you if you play around with stuff like the measurement work, like what does it look like to create a metric like that? Who will adopt it? How does it shift, the conversation around a big fossil fuel client, coming up to pitch, and who wants to pitch for them, and does it create nervousness in the field? Like what are those little bits of kind of warm data, I guess, that tell us we're
Really?
moving in a
Yes.
direction?
And have you trained with Nora Bateson? Has one of you trained in warm data work?
No, I don't know why I threw that in apart from
Okay,
that.
no,
The
but it's
best
an
one
interesting
from afar,
concept.
but yeah,
Wouldn't that be
no.
fun to do? So,
Oh,
and I can see that we could do
absolutely.
that. Were
Yeah.
you one of the founders, or are you one of the people who came in?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
I'm not one of the founders. I joined. Well, actually, I kind of seconded myself while I was still in the industry.
good woman.
And I kind of volunteered. I collaborated. It was all informal and made up, like
Right? Are they
everything.
all the best things?
They're all
Yeah.
the best things.
Yeah.
Until probably a few years ago, where I really joined as a kind of cool.
It's still very young because it's still only 6 years, heading for 7 years, and the pandemic in the middle, which must have disrupted the
Yeah,
Purpose Disruptors.
yeah,
So, talk us
yeah.
a little bit through how this does work. With let's keep cars because cars are pretty neutral-ish. They're not fossil fuel companies, and yet everyone can see that they're probably a part of the problem. How does it land with people whose jobs it is to sell more cars, to suggest that measuring and just the carbon, we're not then looking at the whole meta crisis, we're just looking at one tiny index, but it's an index that people are increasingly paying attention to. What happens? Do they then offset? We as a company have created this much megatons of carbon by selling this many more cars. Therefore, we are going to help somebody plant a forest in Borneo. What happens?
Let me wind back your question. So, what happens when someone who is working in an advertising agency is confronted with the possibility that their work will be like measured? Sorry.
Measured? Yes, that you're measuring the metric tons of carbon, or what are you doing? I'm assuming that you're telling somebody, okay, so you're selling more cars. You sold maybe 10,000 more cars than otherwise would have been sold because of your amazing advertising, or at least that's what you're telling the car company. That many more cars equals this much more CO2.
Yeah.
And therefore, you guys created this much more CO2 in the world. This is part of the problem, not part of the solution. Is that the way the narrative goes? Or if it's not, tell me how it does go.
Well, so I'll say first of all, this is one. Purpose Disruptors does a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick. There's all kinds of different things
Okay.
in the mix, and this is the stick. Like this is the hard line, kind of like, what does it look like to make a metric? And
Okay.
how do we quantify your negative impact?
Okay, that's a big stake. I can imagine that creates quite a lot of internal resistance in people. There's a lot of bits that are going to feel
Oh
shamed and
yeah,
judged as a result of that.
absolutely, yeah, of course, and that's why at this stage, this stuff takes a really long time to adopt.
Right.
At the moment, it's still an idea which feels very edgy. Even
Right.
as there's now funding, there's a methodology getting developed, there's universities on board, so it's kind of building its coherence. But this is still, you need some kind of lead agencies who are going to really fly the flag and be the ones who can test it out and say, we're now trying to adopt this. But yeah, of course, it's a very kind of slow process. But I would say my real kind of expertise, my interest is really in the other side, which is about using the industry's creativity and
Right.
supporting people who are skilled in storytelling and creativity to really understand that they have skills that can be used in a far wider way, and to support very different versions of a good life.
Okay.
Um,
And how does that work out in practice?
So back in sort of, I guess, 2021-ish, we had this question, which was like, the advertising industry are architects of desire, really. Like that's what they do so well. They're given stuff and they can attach like meaning and desirability to that stuff, right? In ways that really appeal to our kind of core limbic system, right? Like they're filling these voids in us.
And are you genuinely trained in how to do that? This is something that I just assume that advertisers have some kind of gut instinct for what's going to work. But it sounds like you're given really quite detailed psychological training of how to identify where people feel a lack and how to suggest to them that widget X is going to fill that lack. Is that the case?
No, not really, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I like the idea of there being like a school of dark arts, which like, yeah.
Well, there is the Stanford Digital Persuasion Lab, does exist, but it's much more gaming and gamification of things.
Yes, yeah. Look, there's a lot of, I mean, I remember working in my early years on alcohol brands who were often amazing at, often they'll have like, one brand will have a portfolio of like loads of different spirits. And they'll have like an archetypal model where each spirit will embody a different archetype, you know, like
So your
gin.
vodka is young and hip hop dance or something.
Exactly. Or like vodka will often, yeah, exactly, have this spirit of like real, like pure essential hedonism, whereas gin is more about like relaxing a little bit, like, you know, whereas rum will be kind of sexy, like there'll be
Right.
all
And
these.
whiskey is rugged mountains and going off to shoot the grouse.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, they have their own like kind of archetypal territories, you know, that we know because we've all lived in the world watching ads for our whole lifetimes, right? And then as a person in that industry, you kind of step into it and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to be the custodian of like this kind of, you know, right, this kind of vodka and this kind of gin, and you know, you kind of,
Wow.
it's a bizarre, I mean, it's kind of extraordinary. It's really modern myth making, I think.
It really is. And then you've got those skills. Okay, which is what we need. We need to build modern myths. That's exactly where I wanted the podcast to go. But anyway, okay, I took us off a track there. Let's get back onto the track. So we were at Purpose Disruptors. You have all of these amazing creative myth-making skills that really go deep into people's limbic systems. And in predatory capitalism, they're all in service to death, basically. They're in service to greater consumption. And Purpose Disruptors realize that they could be in service to life, and particularly Agency for Nature realizes that you could begin to take all of these things and bring your skills to help other people become in service to life. So I'm just struggling to find the right question, Ally. Help me here. How do we get to what it is, first of all with Purpose Disruptors and then Agency for Nature? What is it? What is the core of what you're doing? And particularly, back to my original question, how is it panning out and how do you want it to pan out? Because you're obviously at early days. So what's your, I'm imagining there's an emergence thing here and it changes all the time.
Yeah.
But what's your best case?
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll work backwards and I'll get to best case. Is that
okay? Yes,
okay.
Perfect. Go for it.
So around, and I mean, it's funny, even like in a few years, you realize how much has changed and how much the discourse has changed. You know, when we were back in sort of 21, still deep in the pandemic, it felt like the future, sort of 2030, was, well, it was a decade away. Like we were going to have this wild transformation between now and then.
Right.
And at the time also there was this like notion floating around that we would halve our emissions by 2030, you know, and that and I know sort of emissions and low carbon lifestyle, even that sort of language feels like a time, like a sort of healthy.
But you're right, it was there.
But
we also were not in the middle of so many wars, and we weren't factoring in the amount of CO2 embodied and otherwise that is just thrown around with every missile.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. But that was really the start point, was this thing of like, okay, so in the future, if we get there to this future of halved emissions, like life will look and feel very different, assumedly. And we also know that actually, you know, by most measures, it will be better. It will be a better quality of life
because we'll be doing less work. and have more leisure time and will be more creative. Is that what we were thinking in those days? That's what
Yeah,
you were
well,
thinking.
I mean, definitely there was this sort of idea, which I think still holds, which is like a lot, a world with reduced carbon emissions. All of the infrastructural changes required to build that world will result in cleaner air, easier public transport, less food waste, la la la. Like it
Right.
will be a better, it will be a
Yeah.
best life.
Right.
And yet we have no concept of what that could look like. Like,
Right.
what, how does that feel? When I wake up in the morning in 2030 in this future, like what am I, what does it taste like? What does it smell like? What is
Yeah.
this
What does my
world?
day pan out like?
Yeah,
That is
right.
different. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was
Yes.
like a kind of, okay, this is a problem. Like,
Right.
and a problem that it feels like people in advertising can help resolve,
Yeah,
because
this is
it's about
Thrutopian. It's what
this
does
is
it look like and how do we get there? This is Thrutopian thinking. I'm so
exactly.
excited by this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So that was really our start point, was like, how do we build like new ideas of what this good life can look like, and then bring them to life in a poster, in an advert, like put them in the world, start making cultural materials that give people a sense of what's possible.
Right.
Um, And so our start point really for that was a piece of research. We started getting quite into like how to research people's imaginations, how to research like what people were dreaming of. If you give
Okay.
them space, and I think it takes certain conditions, to create the space to let people really imagine, because we like are really not trained to do that. And in fact,
Right.
we're really, it's not,
Yes.
doesn't come naturally to us at the moment in modernity to sort of dream, right?
So how did you give people the space? That would be my first question, because you're right.
Well, this was in COVID as well. So this was a sort
Okay.
of brave new digital world of
Yes.
doing these,
Stay at home. You
stay
got
at
all the
home.
extra time that you're not commuting. You're with your
Yeah,
family.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. And we worked with kind of focus groups of people, sort of hard to reach people in the climate space at that stage. So people who weren't like, yes, electric cars, bamboo toothbrushes, not them, everyone else. And we created these kind of 3-day long journeys with them that were um really inquiring about like their values, what matters to them now, through kind of the home. Often, show us a room that really like embodies something that feels really important to you, like show us the objects that really matter to you, like show us photos. So kind of try to use the constraints of, the
Right.
the
Where you are in COVID, you just got your
lockdowny
home around you.
moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. To encourage people to really share from the heart, I guess, like what matters to them. You can't really ask people like, what are your values? But you can ask, like, show me the thing that makes you feel alive, or
Right.
and then over a kind of reflective journey, how has this changed in COVID? And what now would you like to see as still true in the year 2030? Like, can we dream into your future? Like, in a quiet place on your own for half an hour, like,
Right.
can you wake up
Yes.
in that? And what are you smelling and seeing? And what's this like good life, the life that you're like, oh yes, like I feel so like myself, and this is it. Here I am. What, like, talk to us about that. What do you see?
Right.
And it was an amazing, I mean, it's an
Yeah,
amazing
totally. I am in
year.
awe. I'm so delighted that somebody's actually doing this.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, it's kind of, the questions are quite clean language, right? It's not leading, but the answers are always the same. The answers are always like, I'm dreaming of a life of real relationship, like relationality. I mean, those are my words, not theirs, but
Sure.
like really having time to work out what it is that I want, or pursuing this thing that I've been dreaming of for ages, but I've been putting it to the side, going back to my mental health, community. That was such a kind of awakening for a lot of people, I think, at that period of time. Like, why don't
Yeah.
I know my neighbors? In 10 years, I want to really know them. I want our kids to play together, and I want us to, feel like we can leave our kids with each other's kids and all that.
Things that used to be normal.
Thing used to
Yeah.
be normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then nature, I
Right.
want to move. I want to be by the sea. I want to be in the woods. I want to be, surrounded by trees. Like this yearning for a return to an interconnected life,
Right. Right. Yeah.
and in different flavors, of course. Everyone had their sort of different slants on it, but it was so coherent, as a dream. It was like, whoa, this is it. This is the good life. This is the one we want. And if we had it, and we weren't trying to, meet these needs through what I think researchers call like pseudo satisfiers,
Yep.
the
Absolutely.
gurus that are selling the needs.
Yeah.
If we just had this, like, cool. How do we
Yeah.
make that? Make that happen?
Which is exactly why the death cult did not want lockdown to happen, because it gave people the time and the experience of what it might be like to not be harnessed to your hamster wheel all day, every day.
Yeah.
And then they had to slam it back. Okay, so you got all this raw data, which was all saying pretty much, it was all creating a coherent picture of how humanity, to be frank, has been for 300,000 years or longer of our evolution. It's only this tiny little sliver at the end. We've gone, no, you have to do something that you hate for most of your adult life.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we'll give you a plastic bag and put you under a bridge somewhere. Okay, so, and then what did you do with it? Where did it take you?
So what we did with that was we created what's called in the industry a kind of a creative brief, which is what a strategist would write to give to kind of creative teams to say, like, this is your audience, this is how we want them to think, feel, what we want them to do, this is the objective. And then the kind of creative team would go away and make a campaign. That would be kind of how it would work. So we wanted to keep to that, like, constraint. That's how the industry knows how to make work. But we made the client the future. So we said the client is the year 2030.
Right. Brilliant.
Year 2030 has an image problem, right? Because no one knows, people, it's solar panels and a wind farm or whatever. It's like, no, it's going to be really good. Like, it's going to be connected. And we know it's going to be like that because we've heard that dream echoed by people, right?
Yeah.
So here's the dream, and here's the year, here's the future. Like, let's promote it. Let's do what we do best as an industry.
Give it an image. Let people see and feel and yearn for this. Right.
Exactly.
Wow.
So that was the brief. It was kind of called, I guess, like Client 2030, and the response was these kind of ads for the future that are a real range of stuff. These are agencies working for free. Just, at the time, I think we were also, it was COP26 year in Glasgow. We'd been given the IMAX at COP26. So we had this like amazing screen space, and agencies wanted to help fill it. So we, had this sort of amazing momentum, and it ended up creating these campaigns, little, what would be called like TV commercials, right? Like 90-second TV commercials for the future that we aired there. And that continued on for a few years, in different versions, tweaks on the
So
brief.
long after COP26. Right.
Yeah.
And we're now at COP30. So is it still going? Are they still going? Is it left?
It morphed into
Okay, I interrupted then. Let's keep going, because so you did them for COP26 in Glasgow. We're in the UK. And tell me what happened. Tell me how they went down, because I'm looking at the slide deck that you sent me, and I'm assuming some of these are these little campaigns, and they were getting huge amounts of views and click-throughs and engagements. It seemed like you were getting real traction.
Yeah, so these were I mean, these were kind of the precursor to Agency for Nature, actually. So
Okay.
this is what gave us confidence that there is a role for not just a brief, but a
Right.
whole agency devoted
Okay.
to this
Right.
work.
Right. Alrighty. So you've got 2030 as the client, which is genius. And it has an image problem. Nobody knows what 2030 is going to look like. And you're presenting to other ad agencies who want space at Co. And you're offering them this brief. Tell us what happened, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it was really fascinating because we put forward this brief. People wanted to do it. As you said, they were motivated. Some were, on a journey with climate, and others were like, "Oh, I just, that sounds good. I want to get involved with that." And they would respond. In advertising, you would have typically like a bit of time to go away, look at the brief, work something out. You'd come back for a creative review, and then you'd
Okay.
go away again, and you'd come back again. So they would respond at this sort of creative review moment. And often the work would be very behavior changey, sustainable products kind of world.
Right. Right.
So they'd be saying, yeah, 2030, it's going to look like this, and we will be driving around in electric cars, and we'll all be using bamboo toothbrushes or whatever. Like, it was
Recycling
still
all the time.
recycling all the time.
All the
Yeah.
stuff that
I'm
is
like, hang on a
basically
minute.
business as usual.
Right, right, or just different products, right? Exactly. Like,
Exactly.
that's not quite the brief. Like, let's go back to the brief, because we're really
Right.
talking about values. We're talking about a
Right.
values shift from
Yes.
a world of separateness, and individualism, to one of like real interconnectedness, to
Right.
self, to others, to
Right.
nature. Have another crack, right? And they'd say,
Okay.
"Oh, I don't really
Don't
know
get
what you
it.
mean. I don't get it.
Right.
I
Because
don't
if
get
you're
it."
not feeling that interconnectedness, it's not a head thing.
It's not a head thing. But if you have a client, you have
You have to
to
get into their head.
you have to get into their head. You have to get
Right.
into their head. And they did,
Okay.
and there would
That's so
always be a
interesting.
moment where they'd come back and they'd be like, I get it.
Right.
Now I get it.
Okay.
It was really extraordinary. And you would see the work shift,
Right.
and suddenly it would be, I mean, it's hard to give examples. So you can, there's work, there's work on the Purpose Disruptors website, and we got hundreds, we made hundreds over the years of different sort of posters and executions, but every time there would often just be this moment of shift where people would go from not really getting it seems a bit complicated, to getting it, and
Okay.
then often to really reporting a kind of mindset shift that would shift everything else for them in their work.
Right. Right. You mean shift everything that they produce going forward, even within business as usual?
Yeah.
Oh,
You know,
that's interesting.
so they would, they would see their role as different. They would suddenly understand that they had had a chance to promote this kind of good life, which is also probably the one that they want, because we all kind of want the same one, right?
Yeah,
So
obviously, yeah.
it activates like a yearning in all of us to
Advertisers are people too. Yes.
advertise to people too. And they're like, oh, this feels good. Maybe for the first time in my career,
Right.
I'm
Right.
really enjoying working on something that feels really true to me, you know?
Right.
And then that rippled into how they worked on other briefs, and how they thought about their role as like narrative change makers, not just like, well, Pepsi's briefed me this, I've got to make Pepsi cool. It's like, by whatever myths and archetypes I'm using to imbue with Pepsi or whoever else, I'm contributing to a wider patterning,
Right. Right.
around what a good life looks like. And that wouldn't be necessarily how they would say it,
Yeah.
but that was a real refrain, and we saw people take quite unexpected turns in their
Right.
careers and their lives, after working on a brief like that.
Okay. And that sounds so hopeful. And yet, from the outside, I wasn't at COP26. COP26 was the one that was a turning point, it seemed to me, because it had more fossil fuel people there than any previous COP. It had the fossil fuel people outnumbered everybody else. And it had felt to me as if we were on a trajectory. It was just coming out of COVID. and people were genuinely talking about systemic change. And then they really started pushing back. It seemed to me that the fossil fuel people got together at COP26 and went, we're stopping this. And they had hiked the price of fossil fuels before a petrostate, Russia, declared war on another petrostate, Ukraine, and that gave them cover for hiking the prices even more. There was a narrative around there's going to be inflation in the States because Biden has done whatever he's done in terms of giving people money. And so a lot of companies just hiked their prices and created inflation that otherwise wouldn't have happened, and declared record profits. So, we've got an inflation narrative. Yay, let's make inflation happen because we can. And it felt like everything began to sink. And then we talked to Paddy Lohman earlier in the year, and he said that at Davos this year, the masks were off and everybody was no longer pretending that they even had a sustainable bone in their body. And that the relief was palpable, and we're all expletive deleted. We're going down the pan, so we may as well just basically, it's the last days of the Reich. Let's just party till the end, and then we can all bite our cyanide capsules, which is so distressing. And yet, I'm looking at a set of slides that you sent me to look at, and there's a film about a talking tree powered by AI technology, and AI may be going to kill us all. If anybody makes it, everybody dies. There is a book called that, and it's frightening. However, good things happen with AI too. And so it feels like we're in this dual reality now, where you've got agency for nature. You've got all these people in the ad industry who, if they haven't gone crazy and or fallen back into business as usual, are actively trying to create values shift at the same time as the old paradigm is in its last gasp and hurling everything at the wall. How does it feel like from the inside to you?
Well, I mean, even talking about COP26 and the brief, it's like clawing back to like a different lifetime, isn't it?
Right. It wasn't that long ago.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
because that was a moment where climate and sustainability had this momentum behind it for the advertising industry, and it was the cool new thing. The advertising industry of all the industries loves a cool new thing and will, rush to it. And that was a moment where we had like, the winds were in our sails, and now, they're not. Let's
Right.
face it. And the industry is under existential threat with AI. There is
Okay.
no,
Like every other industry, frankly. But yes.
well, like any other, but
But probably more so because people
it's a
can just
perfect,
give ChatGPT a brief and it'll produce the ad for you.
yeah. And if
Right.
you're a client and you're spending millions on your creative agency, but now you can actually just have this thing in-house that makes like just as good, 10,000 versions of your
Right.
brand mascot in a different
Right.
setting.
And is trained on how to create behavioral change in people.
Yeah,
The way it can make
yeah,
teenagers commit
yeah,
suicide.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it can make
Why
you
are
buy a
you
car.
why
Yeah.
are you gonna pay humans, millions to do that? You just aren't. So no, you're absolutely right. The industry's head has been
Ah,
hugely turned, and that is really partly why Agency for Nature, which is the kind of the evolution really of that sort of good life questioning and that good life work, had to become something that felt um much less theoretical and much more like tangible and compelling and youthful and clear. So,
right.
where before we were like, what is a good life? Come and explore that with us. It's like this is
Right.
not a moment where people can
They're
just
in under existential
they
threat is
just can't do
when
it.
you can't do that because
Yeah.
your sympathetic system is in overload. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And you're desperately clinging on to the job, that is the problem. And so we're in a whole different world now. An Agency for Nature is a little bit of a response to that, which is like, okay, here's the one thing we know we can all get behind, right? We all know that we've lost this connection to nature. Like this is a sort of one of the strands of the good life
Yeah.
that It so reminds me of having a lurcher puppy.
I want to go up. No, I want to go down.
Yeah, I've changed
Oh
my
well. Yes.
mind again.
Okay, so agency for nature is okay, we're under existential threat, and yet so is the rest of the planet. So what can we do?
Yeah,
Basically.
exactly. And maybe we're not in a headspace to like fully interrogate, the meaning of everything, but like, okay, we can help a new generation fall back in love with nature. We
Right.
can do that. We can bring young
Right.
creatives. We can second them to your magical pop-up weird agency that you've invented, Purpose
Right.
Disruptors and
Right.
Glimpse, and it will be fun, and a great learning experience for the young creatives. And so amazingly, despite a massive drop in kind of the salience of climate and sustainability, Agency for Nature is like this vessel that remains like super magnetic for the industry.
Okay. Okay.
And we have
In
really,
spite of the fact also that their jobs are on the line and they're watching AI suck value away from them, they're still sending young people to come and fall in
to
love with
come and work.
being alive.
Yeah. Which is,
Right.
long may that last.
And I mean, you looked like a young person to me. You don't look like you're old enough to have been decades in the advertising industry. But let's assume they look even younger than you.
They
How
do, yeah, for sure.
how are they responding? Because this is the generation. I'm guessing we're talking about people who were born in the new millennium
Yeah.
and are watching a chaos unfold without the old guardrails or guide rails or constrictions or restrictions that our generations had. They haven't grown up believing that the world is on a trajectory to everything being bigger and better and beautiful. They're on a trajectory to us going over the edge of the cliff if we don't do something in a hurry. How do they respond as people and as creatives to the ideas of agency for nature?
Well, again, it's fascinating because, these are young people who are very connected into culture, not necessarily so connected into nature. Some of them will have had, will have grown up in the countryside, will have some memories in childhood that they can kind of reactivate. And others will come and they'll be like, this is just nature's boring. Nature's nerdy. You wear an anorak. It's not my vibe. Really, it's just not, it doesn't
Oh, my
mean
world
anything to
just
them.
crashed into a brick wall.
Oh
This
no!
is like talking to Daphne Ducrot last week, who said they'd taken a bunch of youngsters, young people, 15-ish,
Yeah.
from Telford to a farm. And one of them said it was the first time he'd seen the horizon. And
Mm,
that just blew all my fuses. But this
yeah.
sounds like quite a lot of that would be the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, well, just people who not haven't
Wow.
necessarily, it just hasn't been part of their
So
life,
great.
it's
Right.
not been cool, and it's not been these are people who are probably extremely online as well because they are.
Also, they grew, their formative years were during COVID. They were
Yeah,
actually locked
also, yeah,
inside and all
that's
the
right.
everything came off a screen. This is
Yeah.
how we end up with Silicon Valley saying that the natural world is an aesthetic option because for them it is. And it's an aesthetic option you can choose not to have and your world doesn't change. So
Yeah.
how do they respond when you go, actually, this is the source of all life and it would be nice if it didn't die?
Well, we begin by doing a kind of a nature immersion experience. So the construct is this is the agency for nature. Nature is, we are in service to nature here. And you go on a client induction. That's what you often do if you're a young creative working on crisps. You go and you have your client induction. So
Hang on
this
just
is
a second. For those of us not in the industry, does that mean you go to a crisp factory or do you go to a
often,
potato
yeah,
farm or?
yeah.
Wow.
Often, you'll
Okay.
go and you'll learn about what the history of this brand is, exactly. You'll go to the showroom or the crisp factory
Well,
or
okay.
whatever.
Right. So
And in
what do
this
you do
case,
then? How do you introduce people to the natural world who think it's
we
not
spend a
cool and
day,
requires anoraks?
we spend a day in nature, but crucially nature in a city. So, we've spent some time at Camley Street Natural Park in near King's Cross and the Walthamstow wetlands. So we'll do briefings in nature, but not over there,
You're not taking them to Dartmoor and making them camp
No,
overnight.
no.
Okay,
And the reason for that is because that's what they think nature is.
right.
We have this idea of nature as being like the countryside, dear, not for me. I live
Cold
in
and
the
wet and
city.
miserable.
Yeah,
Lots of mud.
exactly. And it's like, no,
Ski
it's
out to the
right
hill.
here.
This is
Like
it.
wherever you are, you know, it's like it's this bird, it's this weather, it's just the weather outside, you know, it's like you are always in it. So it's really important to start to see that, you know, that this is not like it's part of this separation myth that's just like, well, I live in a city and not, I don't interact with
Nature is
nature.
out there,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah. And that's an image problem again. It's like, no, it's, you know,
All of
it's,
us.
yeah,
We are a part of it. I
yeah.
mean, even that as a concept must be quite hard to get their heads around.
Well, that's the goal, right? I mean, you know, what happens amazingly over the kind of 12-week period of responding to this brief is that, you know, you'll often speak to them at the end and they'll say, yeah, it's just, you know, it's like, I think I've kind of realized, you know, we are nature, you know, and then you're like, ah,
Yes. And you didn't have to say that.
didn't have to say it.
You
Exactly.
lead them to the
Exactly.
point where they work it out for themselves, which is when
Exactly.
things land. And
Yeah.
how do they respond? So they do their 12 weeks with you, which sounds amazing. And then they go back to advertise
Yeah.
agency X, which is requiring them to sell more widgets. What
Yeah.
happens?
Yeah.
How do they
Well,
not end up crashing into a brick wall, having got to the point where they presumably are at least a little bit in love with being an integral part of the web of life?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, we are really uh very keen to find ways to support them to become advocates for nature, you know, to give them a platform once they have done their work. So what will often happen is they have this 12-week period, there's 10 per season, so 5 pairs from 5 different agencies. They'll create a campaign. We will enlist media donors basically to give us billboards, give us telly, give us TikTok, give us what, you know, whatever we can assemble to seed this work out into the world. So people can see it, so it has some cultural impact, and then that will have a sort of interesting long tail. There'll be a sort of bright burst where, you know, maybe there's press and, you know, there's events or whatever, and those young creatives, you know, often have a platform for the first time and get to really, you know, rehearse a new story about how they made this work and what it means to them. And that will lead them down all kinds of new rabbit holes. Some of them won't last in the industry or will find new paths out or do other work. Some of them will really settle in and will be leaders from the belly, you know, from the belly of the thing. So everyone has their own path, but what we found is everyone who goes through it does seem to remember, does go through this process of remembering, oh, oh yeah, this is, you know, this is what it is. This is
Okay.
what it's all
And
about.
this is, this is how we create the ripple effects. This is how we create the fractal starts and the tipping points and the
Yeah,
critical
yeah,
mass. I'm
yeah,
so in awe.
yeah.
I
Oh,
want
thank
to move on to tendings for endings, but just before we get there,
you.
I have a question that feels quite alive, which is it seems to me that Zach Polanski in the UK and Zoran Mamdani in the US and a few others
Yeah.
are beginning to shift the narrative. Not necessarily Zach Polanski is Green Party leader, but he's been very careful mostly to be speaking about social equity. But he's speaking about it clearly and cleanly in a way that were I his ad campaign person, I would be really happy that it's beginning to land.
Yeah.
Tax, wealth, not work. I think he's got some really good slogans.
Yeah.
And he's part of the Green Party. So I'm wondering whether that shift is landing and whether you're seeing in the young people, because it does seem that a lot of young people are signing up to the Green Party, whether that is changing the narrative landscape yet, or is it too early to see?
Hmm. Well, I think I'll say one thing, which is we put these campaigns out into the world, and then there's a sort of experimental waiting to see how the world responds to them, right? So, you know, obviously with platforms like Instagram, people are commenting and they're saying, you know, this is how this makes me feel. And what we often find is that these are campaigns that really celebrate the feeling of being connected to nature, but in kind of culturally relevant ways. And people will often be like, oh, this is me. Like,
Right.
this times 100, or
Thank you
they'll
for yes.
yeah, and there's a sort of a resonance, I think, like a quality of resonance that we often observe, where the way that people respond, and this is very hard to measure, right? Like I don't really know how
Sure.
you
It's going to end up
really
being anecdotal
evaluate
rather
this.
than hard data.
Apart from
Yeah.
that, exactly. Apart from that, I just know that's like a sign of like an outsized reaction to something they've seen on Instagram, right? Which is just
Right.
like, like, you know,
Yes. And that must be so reinforcing for the young people who created that thing.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the feedback you
exactly.
want. That's
That's
like,
what you
yeah, I did
want,
this thing.
yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, and like, oh, I've touched something which is kind of weirdly true to this community, and all of the briefs of late have been really targeted at specific communities of interest. So, goths, football fans, the drag community, and then you'll see like all of these drag fans being like, oh, nature, it's
Okay.
like, wow. So in all these different pockets, there's a feeling of resonance, and I think there's something about what's going on with Zach and Mamdani in the States as well, where it's just playing back in really simple terms what feels true to us, what
Yes.
feels like
Yes.
we know this to be true, and now you're telling me, and like, thank God,
Yeah, exactly. Now I am free to say this aloud because someone else has said it first.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't quite know how that links actually, but there's just
Oh,
something
it's
there
probably too
about
early. I think
resonance,
that's the thing. I would imagine that over the next year, it feels to me like a narrative landscape is shifting quite hard and quite fast because
Yes.
somebody is able to say the stuff that's true in ways. Jeremy Corbyn was saying something similar, but it sounded maybe because he was Magic Grandpa and he wasn't young and cool and gay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, That
I know.
Belansky is saying it cleanly and clearly, and I think it's going to take off, which will be good. But then obviously the establishment is going to push back, and I don't really want to watch that because it's going to be not
Be
pretty.
very painful, I know. Yeah,
However, before
yeah.
we get to that, we're I've lost track of the time because we had the break for puppy peas and things. So tending to endings. Tell us about tending to endings. Show us for the people on YouTube tending to endings, and tell us how you came to be crafting this, and also how
Okay,
people can get it and what it is. All those things. There
okay,
we
here
go.
we are. So this is a little card deck. Thank you for
We'll put some images up in the show notes for people who are not on the YouTube because it's a podcast. Why would you listen to it on YouTube? But there we go. Yes.
it.
Um,
Where do I start with tending to endings? So I guess it's like a segue from what we've just been talking about, this desire that feels so palpable at the moment for a return to uh, interconnectedness, into becoming whatever we want to call that, like feeling of like, oh yeah, we're nature, that's it. um it feels like, often it seems to lie on the other side of like a deep ditch of grief, you know like, I think in particular, the thing maybe that struck me most was well, the felling of the Sycamore Gap in the UK. Do you remember that?
yes, but for people not in the UK, just give us an explanation.
An absolutely beautiful and ancient and very beloved tree on Hadrian's Wall, very, very iconic tree, was kind of mysteriously felled overnight, and has now gone on to become a big court case in the UK as to who committed this. But the outpouring of grief around the loss of this tree, like, it makes no sense in the world we live in, right? Like, you would look at that and be like, why do all these people, why is this feeling so strong?
Why
You know?
this particular tree, when the tree that they didn't grieve down the road from them was felled a couple of years ago, and nobody
Well,
hardly
or
even
just
noticed.
even like, why in this world where everyone is like, I don't know, the goal is to do industrial growth, like, does a tree come down and we weep like such tears of grief? And it's like, because on some level that tree was our kin, and like, despite the world we live in, that was true, you know? So sometimes there's just these like little breaks in the fabric of life where you're like, oh, see, this is the proof,
Yes, people do care.
Of
Yes.
course we care. And like, even though there's all this noise, like, we can grieve so we all know to grieve somehow so hard. There was another tree that was cut down by a harvester in a car park in Enfield, and it
Mm.
was the same thing. It was like just this well of grief, because we're humans and this is our tree, and
Yeah.
there's something there that feels very poignant
There
to me
was a
because
very iconic picture of a young man sitting on the stump of an oak tree that had been around at the time of, I don't know, the Battle of Hastings or something, and it had been cut down to make way for the HS2 train line that's not even going to happen now.
mm,
And
yeah,
and he's sitting there and he's got his head in his hands, and it's just such an iconic picture of grief. And
oh,
there is something, I think, particularly about trees,
yeah,
that they carry such history
yeah,
and they're so beautiful. And everybody knows that if you go and sit under a tree, however bad you're feeling, you're going to feel better.
right,
So yes.
yeah. But that makes
Anyway,
no
how did that
sense,
lead
you know?
to
Oh
tendings
yeah,
to endings?
sorry, I could talk about
It's
trees.
okay.
Yeah, talk about trees a long time, but there's something there, I think, for me about like, grief is such an unspoken uh, experience in modernity. We just do not know how to deal with death, how to deal with loss, how to grieve things well. That's just been a very personal inquiry for a long time of like how do we bring all of that stuff out of the shadow? Because otherwise, the dreams of the good life over here, once all of those griefs are accumulating in our systems, we really stop losing that capacity to do that dreaming. Um, and I guess that's kind of the link, just to go back lightly to the imagination research that we were doing back with the good life. We did 3 rounds of that over kind of 4 years. And although the direction of travel was always to a life of greater connectedness, the horizon of possibility got smaller and smaller and smaller. So you move from people having these big, like, I'm going to relocate, I'm going to build community, I'm going to do this and that and the other, to like, you know, um, hopefully maybe I'll get promotion, or, hopefully things won't get worse. Things won't get worse. That's not a good life. We can dream bigger than that.
Yeah.
Um, but
But
that
this is
that
this why? Why was it narrowing so much? Because this was through COVID and out the other end.
through COVID and out the other end, I mean, the researchers are calling this like an imagination recession. We are,
Oh,
we are becoming inhibited in our capacity to dream other worlds into being. And part of that is like stacked up shadow stuff, loss, frustration,
yeah.
grief, grief, grief,
And fear and
fear,
fear
exactly.
shutting down our capacity for imaginal
It
space.
paralyzes, it paralyzes our imaginative faculties. So to me, it started to become really clear that there is this sort of counter work to be done. If you're working in imagination and dreaming the new things into being, we equally need to be getting better at dreaming the old things out of being,
Okay. Composting
um,
the old.
composting the old and making space for that stuff to get metabolized, to not get stuck, to not just get pushed down. We have to work out how to tend to these endings in our
Right.
lives, these losses, the
Sure.
lost futures we thought we were going to have, the
Right.
lost
Yeah.
direction of, endless progress that we were the inheritors of. That was a story that we thought was ours, and it's probably not,
And it definitely isn't.
it's not.
No, okay. And so tendings to endings is this card deck that you've made to help people do the inner work together or alone or
Yeah.
both or
It's even lighter than that, it's just it's another experiment. You can probably tell, Amanda, I'm just interested in very light experiments and
it's
then seeing
lovely.
what happens.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Using metaphors from the garden and from gardening, metaphors
Right.
like
Because composting is a thing. Right.
exactly, the bonfire and deadheading and composting and the wormery, and these are endings that we can locate in a cycle of regeneration. Like
Right.
we know in the garden how it works.
Yes.
Things
Right.
things go down,
They
they come
grow in
back
the
up.
spring, they die in the autumn,
Yeah,
they regenerate over the winter. And it's cyclical. The death
exactly.
is not an ending, it's the beginning of the new.
It's the beginning of the new, and often in a world of compost, like it's impossible to even say,
Mm.
which is this side or that side of birth and death. It's something much more mysterious, actually,
Yeah.
And that just feels like it has medicine for us in this
Mm.
time.
And who's the us? You and who else is part of this making,
Who's the us?
creating?
Well, so this is a project I've been kind of co-creating with a wonderful a garden thinker called Will Brown,
Nice.
who is really interested in the garden as a kind of a learning ground for change of all kinds.
Okay.
And he joined a sort of peer learning journey I hosted a few years ago around death and the collective imagination. I was really
Right.
curious about pursuing this inquiry of how we um enrich our imaginaries around death. How do we fertilize all of our mental models and beliefs and constructs around death, because they feel very thin. you know
Yes. Yes. Our culture is very bad at dying with grace
Very
and
bad.
intention and awareness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
um
Beautiful.
so we'll
Because
join
you
that, and
trained
then
as a death
Heather.
doula also. I think that's worth saying.
I did. I'll just say Heather as well, Heather
Okay.
Knight,
Sorry.
who is my other collaborator, who's wonderful. She's a designer, so she's also involved in the project.
Okay.
Does a lot of kind of regenerative design work. And yes, I did. Yeah, no, I trained as a death doula because I had this question of like how, if we live in a sort of a dying time, let's be honest, with expired stories all around us that are
Mm.
still being held up on life support, how do we help it die? You
Sure.
know, how do
Yes.
we how do we how do we accompany this process, which has to happen, because right now it's not
Yes.
happening. uh,
Yes.
It's not
We're in the
happening in a
extinction
natural way.
burst of everything resisting it happening because people don't have the visions of a world that could be better on the other side. It is actually easier to imagine the total extinction of life on Earth than it is to imagine the end of capitalism
Exactly.
because we haven't done the grief and the composting and the death work. This is so lovely, Ali. Honestly, I'm
Mm,
so impressed.
mm.
So you've created this card deck,
Yeah.
and can people get it from you? Buy it even? We're still in the death cult of predatory capitalism. It presumably costs something to make. Is this a thing?
Yeah. Yeah, yes, they can. And it's been a really funny journey because we began it in maybe sort of the hope that we could just live alongside the death cult of predatory capitalism and not really participate in it. And we were like, we'll just
We all
seed
think
some
this.
cards into the world and put them on a bus stop and that see what
Cool.
happens. And that, but then obviously everyone was rightly like, no, I'd like them,
I'd actually
I'd
like to
like
buy one.
them. I'd like,
Right.
yeah, and also, yeah, I'd like them next day shipping because I've got a thing, on
Right.
Friday. Like,
Right.
oh, okay, no, cool, we can do that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've
Okay.
done that, and it's not a fully kind of operational business shop, but they are available for sale. You can
Okay. And
buy
we
them,
will
and
put a
we'll
link
share
in
them
the show notes if people would like to avail themselves because they've got a thing.
because they've got a thing,
Okay.
exactly.
Or even they just want to explore. I mean, seriously, it does feel to me, this is why we run Dreaming Your Death Awake once a year. Because I think unless we'd learned how to die with full awareness and grace and joy and wonder and awe and courage at that next stage, that rite of passage,
Yeah.
that passing forward, we can't learn to be in love with life. If we
Ex-
constantly got the grief and the fear in the background, we're not. It's very
Yeah.
hard to be.
Yeah.
You can be in love while grieving. It's really hard to be in love while being afraid. I think.
Oh, I
I
love that
think grief and
concept.
love are two sides of the same coin. If
Yeah.
somebody close to me dies tomorrow, I will not be less in love with the puppy. In fact, I will probably be more in love with the puppy because life. But if
Yeah.
I am terrified, it's really hard to have my
Mm.
value.
Mm.
And so anything that helps people to engage with that flow of life and death
Yeah.
and thereby come into the creative space that is the antithesis of fear, I think
Yes.
is just going to be amazing. So I'm genuinely in awe. You've got
Oh,
Purpose Disruptors, you've got agency for life, for nature, sorry, which is also agency for life,
Nice.
and you got tending to endings. What else, Ellie? What else are you doing that we don't know about yet?
What else? I mean, this question of how we help things to die is just such a rich one at the moment, and the response to the cards has been, again, my favorite theme of resonance has been outsized, and
Right.
long emails saying like, we need this,
Okay.
so
We do.
again, it's just one small, very modest tool in service of a kind of a collective awakening and a collective reckoning with how we tend to and find agency in this moment, of loss. So I have a lot more, I have personally a lot more work, I think, in that space, and
Yeah.
and equally, with the work of Agency for Nature, you have to hold them both at the same time, don't you? Like you just
Sure. Yes, and it's an emergent thing, I'm imagining, particularly when you're so aware of emergence that you have no idea. If you could predict where it was going, it wouldn't be emergent. So Agency for Nature is still going? Are you still running your cohorts of
very
10?
much so. We're in a process of we've been kind of recalibrating a little bit and working out what impact really means and
And what does it
who.
mean?
I'm laughing because the more interest. Sorry, this is a whole other. I'll say in a
A whole
line.
new podcast that we're probably going to have to
Yeah,
do later. But anyway, go on.
the more interest we have from the mainstream, the more we have to learn how to speak, in a way that makes sense to DEFRA, while at the same time holding, what we believe, is a paradigmatic shift that
Right.
needs to happen with We Are
On the
Nature.
assumption
So
that DEFRA is not really on, not all of DEFRA. Some of DEFRA actually, I think, probably is. But some of this government is clearly not on board with paradigmatic shift. Okay, so you're holding all of that. And so, how are you measuring impact? Because I'm guessing somewhere along the line, people in the old paradigm need you to measure impact. How do you do that?
yeah, well, this is where you start to have to get really multilingual, I think, and this is a
Right,
new skill for many of us, jumping between paradigms.
right.
It's like what are the KPIs that
Mhm.
mean something in the existent paradigm, like making nature famous as a Nike campaign, like building advocates, building the field. All of this stuff is true and real. It's
Yeah.
real in the world. And then there's like another layer, which is, really about redirecting a skill set which is very, very good at manufacturing desire
Mm,
towards reactivating yearning for our like innate human knowing, you know.
yes.
So
Yes.
what's that KPI? And who cares about that,
Right.
because that's true for us and true for some others, maybe true for a funder, not sure.
It's going to be a very
Certainly some
special funder,
funders.
but they do exist.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of other funders might be speaking different language. So
Wow.
it is a multilingual job, as I'm sure with your projects as well.
Yeah.
You got to speak
Yeah.
a few languages.
But it's very exciting. It feels like you're right at that leading edge of into becoming change, where you have to have a foot in the old camp because we do still live in
Yeah,
that
we live
world.
here.
And yet we have to have the foot on the kind of moving elevator that we don't know where it's going.
Yeah,
And and
exactly.
and you have to not
Yeah.
break apart and not split open and hold it with the joy and the
Hold
reverence and the
some.
awe and the wonder that is part of the new into becoming, while not looking completely off the rails to the people who are
Yeah,
still stuck in the old paradigm. It's a really
that's it.
interesting juggling job. But it feels really alive, and you look really alive to me in this. How does it
Oh,
feel?
oh, it feels so alive. I mean, it
Right.
feels so. I love that you've just told me I look really alive. That's great. I mean, I
Thank
know
you.
it does. It feels absolutely like the work. This
Yeah.
is this is the work. And I think something has shifted probably for us or for me recently, which is this real anchoring um, in this new mysterious paradigm slash ancient paradigm, right?
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
the one where we're nature, like
Right. The
everything flows
re-evolving
from that.
into that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And even though we can't, I don't have very good words to evidence it to DEFRA, for example, doesn't matter. I'm there now, or
Right.
I'm planting my feet there. So we
See
just
where it goes.
see where it goes. Yeah.
Right. So we'll come back, you and I, in about a year and see where it's gone. I think that'd be really exciting. For people listening who are engaged in a life, they can obviously they can get your pack of cards and they can tend to endings. For ordinary people who are not part of the advertising industry, have you got anything that they could do to feel alive and to feel like they're being part of what you're talking about? Is there anything they can do to support Agency for Nature or anything? What could people be and do to help?
What a beautiful question. I mean, Agency for Nature exists to help people fall back in love with nature. And it is, part of hopefully a growing movement of different actors who are all working out how we fall back in love with nature. So that's on all of us. That's on
Yeah.
that's on the culture.
Okay.
And I would love to, yeah, so curious always about how people, particularly people who don't have the source code in their childhoods that they can return to. Like me, I didn't really have that. I grew up in a city.
Oh,
I've
wow.
learned it
Okay.
as an adult,
Right.
So
How did you learn it? I mean, this is almost another podcast, and I've lost track of the time because we've had a couple of breaks. But how, just very briefly, what was it? Can you measure a tipping point?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell, yes. I mean, I really woke up to sort of, first of all, the climate crisis around 2019, but that was quite heady, that was kind of a logical following of facts and thinking, whoa. And then there was a moment, I was obviously locked down. I was living on my own in a flat in 2020, having never lived outside of a city. And I somehow purchased for myself some tomato seeds, and I grew my very first tomato in a flat, like a tiny little flat above a Tesco Express in Kentish Town. And only two little tomatoes made it, these little.
Right. Yes.
But I was just, I was
Don't they
thrilled
taste
beyond
amazing when
belief.
you've
I
grown your
didn't
own?
eat them. I didn't
You
eat
didn't
them.
eat them. Oh,
No,
wow.
I put them in a little candle pot holder thing, and I put them outside. I had a sort of big community of pigeons, real filthy North London pigeons who all lived just outside my window. And I put out this little offering, and I waited, and
Ali,
I
that's
came back the next
amazing.
morning to see if they'd eaten it. They hadn't eaten it. I came back the next morning, they hadn't eaten it, and on the third day they'd gone.
They can. Those are for
And I
us.
burst into tears, Amanda. I just felt for the first time in my life like I had participated in a cycle of reciprocity with the natural world. And I was like 29 or something. I was old, you know.
Ali, that's not old. Trust me, that's not
Well,
old. But anyway,
it's
you were
old to wake
29.
up to
Okay.
things
Okay.
that, hopefully at the age of 2, my son's age,
Yeah.
but I learned it at 29,
You probably did know it at 2, and it was probably
Yeah,
domesticated out of you. And
it's
that's
true. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
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 Glorious. Oh, that is a whole other podcast. Okay, so anyone listening can fall in love with life. Can they follow you on Instagram, any of the others? And I don't do Instagram, but do you retweet on Instagram or comment? You do something to support an Instagram post? Is that a thing?
Yeah, 100%. I'm Ally Kingston on Instagram. I'm not an extremely online person, but I'm
A little bit on
very
LinkedIn. I found you on LinkedIn.
a little bit on LinkedIn, and Tending to Endings. You can find it Tending to Endings.
We will put a link to that in the show notes to where people can buy some from you. Although if 10,000 people buy them, you're going to be spending your solstice wrapping things and putting them in the post, but we'll work with that one.
We'll
Okay.
work with that.
Okay. All right. Ali, this has been such a joy. It's such an amazing way of heading down into the dark nights, or for people in the Southern Hemisphere, heading up into the bright nights. Thank you so much for everything that you are and you do. And I would love to talk to you again
Thank
in sometime in 2026 or early 27 to see where it got to.
you. It's
Thank
been
you.
an absolute joy. Thank you.